What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel, and it's time for another game preview / game prediction for the 2023 college football season. And our next game preview / game prediction will be Week 11's matchup between the Ole Miss Rebels and the Georgia Bulldogs. SEC Conference matchup here coming up this weekend here in week number 11, but a big-time game here between the West and the East here in the SEC Conference as well. Ole Miss and Georgia don't have a lot of history with one another, but the last time they met in a regular season game, this will be the first time that they're going up in a regular season game since 2016. That was in the month of September that year. Ole Miss won 45-14, and then the last time they met in Athens, Georgia was in 2012 of November 3rd. So Georgia won that game 37-10, and Georgia leads the all-time series 32-12. So we're going to give you a game preview / game prediction on this game. We're going to go through the stat comparisons between these two teams and also look at the game summary of what time the game will be coming up this weekend and who the favorite going into the game is this weekend as well. And then we'll also look at the previous 5-game matchup results here for both of these teams from their 2023 season, and then we'll give you the prediction here of how the game will go down this upcoming weekend. So let's get right into it with our game preview / game prediction here for the Ole Miss Rebels and the Georgia Bulldogs. We'll start with the stat comparisons here between these two teams. We'll start with Ole Miss. Their 2023 record is 8-1. So yeah, they just have one loss on the year, and that was to, of course, Alabama in the month of September. You look at the points per game for Ole Miss, they're averaging about 38.8 points per game. Total yards per game, this is a very explosive offense as always. 478.9 yards per total yards this year for this Ole Miss offense. So yeah, that's a really good number there for this Ole Miss offense. Again, they're not averaging a bunch of points per game, but this is a team that's very explosive, at least on the offensive side of football. Passing yards per game, 297.7 yards per passing. Jackson Dart's been having a really good season, only thrown like 4 interceptions on the year. So he's been taking care of the football offensively, and also he's got 16 passing touchdowns. It may not seem like a lot, but Jackson Dart's been taking care of the football. That's been the best thing about him this year. Rushing yards for this Ole Miss team, 181.2 yards per rushing. This Ole Miss team has a really good, really loaded at running back. They can run the football really well on offense, so that's the really big strength, I believe, of this Ole Miss team. But this is more like a passing attack team, but this is more like a balanced offense. So again, they're both pretty similar at rushing and passing the football in every single game. And then you look at the offensive ranking here for Ole Miss, they're 11th in the country. No surprise there by that number. This is a top 15 offense in the country. But defensively, that's their biggest weakness. The defense has been their biggest weakness here throughout the Lane Kiffin era. Obviously, defensive ranking is 61st in the country. It's not really worse, though, than other teams that, don't really have a really good defense. It's not really as worse as USC's and also Colorado's. So defensively, Ole Miss does have a really, not a decent defense, but, just like a little bit of a, bad defense, but it's 61st in the country. But at least it's not like in the hundreds or anything like that. So these are the stats here for Ole Miss. Let's now look at Georgia's. They're coming in with a record of 9-0. They're averaging about 39.3 points per game. That is, very big surprise there. I'm very surprised that Georgia is averaging more points than Ole Miss is, which is very surprising here. And also another big surprise is the total yards per game for Georgia. They're averaging about 493 yards per total yards this year. So yeah, this is a very explosive Georgia offense. I know the game doesn't really seem like, they're being really that explosive on the offensive side of football, but this is still a really good offense of Georgia. I think this is probably the best offense. I think it's better than last year's, maybe not compared to like a couple years ago, but this is definitely a really good offense this year for this Georgia team. Passing yards per game, 325.3 yards per passing. Carson Beck's been having a really good season. He's close to the 3,000-yard marker in passing, and he's got the same touchdown passes and the same amount of interceptions as Jackson Dart. Both of these quarterbacks have the same touchdown passes. So Carson Beck has 16, and then, of course, the same interceptions. So Carson Beck has 4 interceptions as well. So both quarterbacks have been taking care of the football this year. Look at the rushing yards for Georgia. This is a Georgia team that is a decent running team, about 167.7 yards per rushing. Donovan Edwards is one of their top running backs, got about 633 yards on the ground and 8 touchdowns this year. So both of these teams have pretty strong running games. I think Georgia Georgia is more of a passing attack team, though, and then Ole Miss is just like really a balanced offense. But you look at the offensive ranking, this is what really surprises me. Offensively in the rankings, Georgia is 6th, and then on defense, they're 9th. So their offense is better than their defense. But again, both sides of the football, Georgia is just so good on both sides of the football on the offense and defense. I mean, based on the ranking, you can tell that both sides of the football that Georgia is good. Again, their offense is like 6th in the country, and then defensively, they're 9th in the country. So these are the stat comparisons here between these two teams. Stat comparisons here. Georgia surprisingly has the total yard advantage at 493 out of Ole Miss 478. They also have the advantage in the passing yards, but Ole Miss has an advantage in the running game. This is a really good Ole Miss running game. I mean, obviously they got some really good tailbacks, and they also have, not an advantage in the offensive ranking, but Georgia has advantages in the offense and defensive rankings. I mean, it's no surprise there that they're like 9th in the country on defense. So these are the stat comparisons here between these two teams. Let's now get into the game summary here for this matchup between Ole Miss and Georgia. This game's going to be at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on Saturday on ESPN. The game is in Athens, Georgia, and Georgia favored by 10.5 for right now, and the over and under is at 58.5. Ole Miss comes into this game, like I said, with a record of 8-1. Again, their one loss coming to Alabama. They also came off a win against Texas A&M this past weekend, 38-35. And then for Georgia, they come into this game with a record of 9-0. They haven't really played a really tough schedule this year. I mean, when you look at the schedule, it's not really that tough for this Georgia team. But their November schedule right here, this month of November stretch is definitely really tough for them. They're coming off a 9-point win against a really good Missouri team. So we could kind of expect a really tough game here for this Georgia team. Both of these teams, we're going to see where they're ranked tonight in the playoff rankings. I'll give you my reaction video to those playoff rankings tonight. So stay tuned for that video, and I'll give you my thoughts about Georgia and Ole Miss's rankings. But I think this is definitely going to be a top 10 matchup, maybe like even a top 15 if Ole Miss is ranked outside the top 5, or I should say the top 10 perhaps. But Georgia, I think they'll be at least ranked number 2. That's kind of what I'm projecting, that Georgia would be number 2 tonight, and then Ole Miss probably would be number 10 or maybe a number 11. But again, we're talking about the game here. This game will be on Saturday at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, and the game will be televised on ESPN. Again, the game is at Athens, Georgia. The Bulldogs have home field advantage going into this game. Again, that's why they're a favorite in this one. And I'm very surprised that they're favored by 10.5 in this one. I think that number should be a little bit lower because I think this is definitely going to be a really tough game for this Georgia team. Looking at the FBI likes Georgia in this one. FBI likes Georgia by 69.5% chance to win this one. No real surprise here because Georgia is at home in this game. And then for Ole Miss, the FBI gives them about a 30.5% chance, which I think is a very high number, to be honest, for the FBI. Usually when a team travels to Athens, Georgia, it usually is at 15 to 20% range. But Ole Miss is that team that's getting a lot of hype. They're getting a lot of, love here because obviously they have a really good chance, I think, to beat Georgia this weekend. But again, Georgia has the home field advantage in this one. I just think that makes them a little bit comfortable in this game. But again, this is the game summary here for this one. This game will be at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on ESPN. And again, a big SEC showdown here between these two teams. All right, let's go to the previous game results here for their 2023 season. Again, Ole Miss's record is at 8-1. Their one loss coming to Alabama in the early month of September. They lost that game 24-10, but they've been on a winning streak ever since that loss. They defeated LSU in a big shootout there, 55-49 on September the 30th. Had a close game against Arkansas, 27-20 on October the 7th. That was a very competitive game there. They had a bye week after that Arkansas game, and they traveled to take on Auburn on October 21st. Won that game by 7 as well, 28-21. And then they also defeated Vanderbilt October 28th, 33-7. And then this past weekend, they defeated the Aggies of Texas A&M 38-35. So Ole Miss has had a lot of very good shootout type games and also some very competitive games. Again, those Arkansas and Auburn games are very competitive, and also the same thing with Texas A&M. Texas A&M had a really good chance to maybe pull off an upset, but Texas A&M missed a game-tying field goal, and that's the reason why Ole Miss won that game. So these are the previous game game results here for the Rebels. And then looking at Georgia, they're coming in with a record of 9-0. Again, they haven't lost a game, but they haven't really had a tough schedule this year. They defeated Auburn as well on the road on September the 30th just by 7 points, 27-20. October 7th, they defeated Kentucky 51-13. That's probably been the best game that they played all year long. They defeated Vanderbilt on the road 37-20. That was a really game that Georgia was really inconsistent in. Of course, Brock Bowers went down with an injury, and that's kind of why that Georgia was kind of inconsistent for the rest of that game. Then they had a bye week. They played Florida on October 28th. They beat them 43-20. So that was a big win there for this Georgia team. Obviously, we thought they would carry that momentum into the Missouri game, but they just didn't. They only won by 9 against Missouri on November the 4th just this past weekend, 30-21. So again, Georgia hasn't really played a tough schedule. That's the reason why they're undefeated. But this month of November stretch coming up is a very tough one for them. So it's more than likely they could probably lose a game here coming up here in the month of November, which I don't really see them doing yet. But looking at the game result, comparisons here between these two teams, Ole Miss, they've had a lot of competitive games, but there have been some times where they've been consistent and also very inconsistent. But for Georgia, I think they have had more inconsistent games than Ole Miss has. I mean, when you look at the game results here, Georgia has only like a couple of big-time wins. Kentucky was obviously their best game of the season, probably for me so far. And then Florida, I think that was their best game as well. They won those games by blowouts. But again, they've just been inconsistent at times. So these are the previous game results here for both of these teams. Let's now get to the prediction here for this matchup. And again, Ole Miss versus Georgia, this is where College Game Day will be here coming up this weekend. Again, it's a big-time game here in the SEC Conference, but it's not like a division matchup. It's an SEC West versus SEC East showdown, so it's not like a very important game for both of these teams. But it's really an important game here for both of these teams in regular season play. I mean, obviously, Ole Miss is trying to make maybe a New Year's Six Bowl and also maybe still make a run for a playoff spot. And then for Georgia, they're still trying to, figure things out. They're trying to, see what they're, where they're at and everything. They're trying to become that dominant team once again in the country. How I think this game's going to go down, I think we could kind of expect a really close game here. I think Ole Miss is going to compete in this game, but I think their defense will not really stop the Georgia offense from, scoring a lot of points in this game because Ole Miss just doesn't have a really good defense. Georgia has a really good defense, but I think that offense of Ole Miss is going to give them some problems. I think this game is going to go into the fourth quarter. We know that, Ole Miss likes to go for it on fourth down and, situations, pretty much in this game. I mean, obviously, Lane Kiffin's going to go for it on fourth down. There's no question about it. He's going to try to catch the Georgia defense off guard. And like I said, I think this game goes into the fourth quarter, but I think a turnover probably late in the game probably changes everything. And also maybe an offensive touchdown probably changes the game. But I tell you what, with Georgia at home and a very tough game to call here, I'm going to stay with the Bulldogs. I'm going to go with my preseason pick. And I think Georgia being at home makes them comfortable. And I think they win this one 38-34. So I got Georgia winning here against Ole Miss 38-34. I think Ole Miss probably runs out of steam in the fourth quarter because they like to go hurry-up tempo as well. And when you think about it, Georgia is going to go up against hurry-up tempo offenses now here in the 2 weeks that they have coming up. They got Ole Miss on Saturday with a hurry-up tempo offense, and then you got a fast-paced offense against Tennessee the next weekend. So it's going to be a tough stretch here for this Georgia team, but again, I don't really see Georgia losing at home at all because being at home, I just don't really see Georgia, losing this game. So I got Georgia winning against Ole Miss here 38-34. Again, this is the biggest game of the weekend coming up here. It seems like it's going to be a top 10 showdown based off of the playoff rankings, maybe coming out tonight. So we'll see what the playoff rankings look like. But give me your thoughts on these game preview / game prediction. Again, who do you think wins it here? Do you got Georgia winning it? Do you got Ole Miss winning it? And also give me your final score prediction down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video and stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports channel.